across the studio. Emerald Maxwell, Media Watch. Good evening. Starting in France, coronavirus cases are on the rise,
yes.
Alarmingly so. You've got some news about COVID-19 in primary schools.
Yes, they're actually relaxing the rules around COVID-19 in primary schools. If a child tests positive now, the whole class won't have to close. That only happens if 3 children test positive in that class. The plan has been welcomed by parents, says French news channel France Info, but is worrying teachers. The government's argument goes that children don't transmit the virus as very easily, and so it's unnecessary to close an entire class for the sake of one child, as it's unlikely to have spread. But not everyone's convinced by that, including some parents. This mother says, oh, well, should we be encouraging grandparents to pick up our children at the school gates then? And France Info also quotes a doctor saying that the government is guilty of magical thinking because the science over this is really not conclusive. We still don't know how infectious children are. Here we have a cartoon showing what teachers think of the measure. They are not reassured, and here they are teaching children on stilts to be as far away as possible from them. And here we have a Twitter user who says, quoting the Minister of Education, who said, France has some of the strictest health measures in Europe. He says, yeah, here's a graph to understand that. And you have a ton of arrows all pointing to the same conclusion, that the child can go back to school and all's well that ends well.
It's one of those ones that's funny, but you really can't bring yourself to laugh at it because the reality is actually quite grim, isn't it?
Too close.
Okay, moving on to the next one. In
Yes.
Britain, cases rising there. Boris Johnson's announced some draconian measures for England especially. The government introducing these restrictions there to try to sort of stop this surge in cases.
That's right. And the response by people in Britain has been no less sceptical to that. Boris Johnson has set out a raft of new measures, warning that people shouldn't expect a return to normal for at least 6 months. The reaction online has been very scathing to the measures, particularly at Johnson's perceived attempts to shirk responsibility and at yet more government U-turns. This journalist pointing out that only 3 weeks ago, Boris Johnson was telling people to go back to the office in huge numbers, and quite right too. Today, he ordered people to do the reverse. But in particular, there's a lot of, here we go, there's another user saying, did Boris really blame ethnic minorities for COVID worsening? And actually, one of the things that got the most...
Did he really do that? Because that's appalling.
Well, we'll come back to that. But
Sure.
one thing that has attracted a lot of criticism is the trace and testing system. But Boris Johnson refused to accept responsibility for that. He said it wasn't because of that the COVID rates were so high. And actually, it was down to something else. Let's take a listen now to him in Parliament.
I think the continual attacks on local test and trace and what the NHS test and trace have done are undermining and unnecessary. And actually, there is an important difference between our country and many other countries around the world, and that is our country is a freedom-loving country, Mr. Speaker.
Britain is a freedom-loving country, the implication being that other countries don't really value their freedom.
So it all sounds like wind, doesn't it, to be perfectly frank, but there you go.
There you go. Another measure he introduced was this measure that pubs will have to close at 10 p.m. on the dot, as if the virus respected curfews. This BBC journalist making the more serious point, though, that that doesn't really, will that actually address the worrying trend of the high incidence of COVID amongst ethnic minorities, and especially Asians in Britain. And to conclude, this is a little TikTok video that's been doing the rounds as how Boris has handled the coronavirus, or how a lot of people think he's handled the coronavirus.
Indeed. Another one of those things that's, it's funny, but you can't laugh because there's a really serious matter behind it. And I wonder if that chap's okay, poor fella. You've been taking a look, too, online at the UN's General Assembly. We've seen from early in the bulletin Emmanuel Macron speaking. Of course, this year's General Assembly is happening virtually, isn't it?
That's right.
No one's turning up. They're all sending videos.
Yeah, and The Guardian says it could be worse than the world's worst Zoom meeting. A parade of pre-recorded messages from the world's self-styled strong men. No less than 50 men, apparently, will address the assembly before the first woman even gets a chance to speak, and that's Slovakia's president tomorrow. Today we had, amongst others, Jair Bolsonaro, Donald Trump, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Xi Jinping, renowned Democrats and humanitarians, as this Twitter user calls them.
Was that laced with irony? Yeah.
It might be. Out of that list, China's Xi was at least saying the right things. That, for instance, China had no intention of fighting a hot or cold war, although some pointing out that China should really be embracing principles like the rule of law itself before preaching them abroad. Trump, though, came out of it sounding like a quote, like I quote this Twitter user, a warlord. And lots of people saying that he actually allowed China to look good. It allowed China to present itself as the more responsible country and one that believes in international cooperation, as Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, says. This viewer, meanwhile, was commenting on UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' comment, where he said that countries shouldn't be acting selfishly during this pandemic, and he sort of criticized particularly the side deals when it came to vaccinations, when countries were trying to grab all the vaccinations for their own populations. And this Twitter user saying, raise your hand if you think he's talking to Trump. And lastly, lots of people were lamenting how now that it's all remote and pre-recorded, the fun has kind of been taken out of the World Leaders Assembly. And this comedian says, not only has COVID robbed us of the chance to see Trump laughed at by world leaders today, we're also missing out on Vanki's nipple enhancement, which he so proudly flaunted before the General Assembly last year. Of course, reminding us about this what some have labelled a wardrobe malfunction by Ivanka Trump.
Okay. Perhaps we should leave that one to lie. Yeah? Okay. Emerald, thank you very much indeed. Emerald Maxwell there with the Media Watch. Great to see you.